Hello everybody, my name is SnipingIsFun, and today I'm going to be presenting you guys yet another video. It's not going to be video game related, anime related, wrestling related, or anything related. It's going to be movie related. And if you guys see obviously in the video title and description and whatnot, it's obvious what I'm going to be talking about, so I really shouldn't beat around the bush or anything and talk about what I'm going to talk about. But yeah, today's video, what I'm going to do is basically give my thoughts on how I would do a Ghostbusters 3. Now, the talks of a sequel to Ghostbusters has been done for a while now. There was the video game back in 2008, which was kind of essentially a Ghostbusters 3, or at least a Ghostbusters continuation to the story, and so on and so forth. Basically, Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, and all that stuff have recently been bringing up what they want to do, like the fact that Bill Murray doesn't want to do anything with the series anymore. He wants to do all the stuff with the girls. And the new Ghostbusters, I think Dan Aykroyd wants to do something. The passing of Harold Ramis kind of made, things a little harsher on the fact that there ever would be a sequel with the original, group anymore, which is kind of sad. But, I want to get my thoughts on it. And it's basically because I love the Ghostbusters movies, especially the first one, but the second one too. I love the Ghostbusters movies. And I would love to give my thoughts on what I would generally do. It's a general premise. It's not like I'm going to go into full depth, this is the first scene, this is the second scene, the end, this is going to be the villain. No, just an overarching plot and story element that I would do personally for this game to kind of make it a continuation, which I think if they did a Ghostbusters 3, there has to be a continuation from the original stories, but it can't just be its own story out of the blue. There should be some sort of connection, some sort of passing of the torch, some sort of continuation where if they decide to do a newer movie or newer movies, more of a new series, we'd have to know why and how this is happening compared to the first two movies back in the 80s, and why, how they connect and how we got to this point, connection to it. Which would mean we would have to have a lot of the original characters at least play a certain role in it. We don't need them to all be major characters. Sorry, Bill Murray, you might not want to, you might not want to be in this movie, but if there is a Ghostbusters 3, you kind of have to play some sort of role so you can kind of pass this torch, pass the story. If you don't want to do it anymore, you got to make it look logical. You can't just say, oh, these are new Ghostbusters, they came out of the blue and nowhere. The original group just left and disappeared. They just wanted to be Ghostbusters just to be Ghostbusters. You can't really do that. So I basically think about it like this. This movie would take place, okay, the first one took place in the 80s. So I'd say these ones took place, this one's going to take place maybe about 20 years from now, in current day, the 2000s. 2000, let's say this year, 2014 or whatever. So it takes place years later. Time has passed, and the Ghostbusters after Ghostbusters 2 would have obviously continued being Ghostbusters trying to protect, New York, and they might have traveled worldwide to be Ghostbusters worldwide, maybe. Maybe they did something like that. And I was thinking about this, and I'm sorry that I have to say this, but we would actually, how Harold Ramis sadly passed away in real life. I think in order to write him out, you could say that Egon died sometime along the way. It's a good way to write his character out. I'm sorry to say that, but it's a decent way of trying to write the character out of the story to make it make some sense to the point that, maybe he just didn't show up. Because he's a character, Egon wouldn't have been someone that would have left the Ghostbusters. He would want to stay in the Ghostbusters. The only thing that pretty much would have written him logically out of the group would have been dying. I'm sorry to say that, but that's a good way to move his character around. I would say this is years later, maybe sometime in the 90s or early 2000s, Egon died somehow. And let's say, since there was some sort of relationship between him and, what's that girl's name? Janine? The lady, their assistant lady that they got, you could probably say that since there was some sort of connection, a love relationship between them, you could kind of say that they did get married along that time, too. Sometime in the 90s they had a kid or whatever, they had a family, but he passed away. And after he passed away, I think, Peter Venkman, Ray, and Winston, all basically, they wanted to continue on as a three-person group, but the fact that Egon died, it was putting a bit of pressure on them. They didn't feel the same. They lost they lost a valued team member that they've had since the first movie. They tried to, like I said, they continued on the Ghostbusters after the second movie, and they thought it would work, and they wanted to continue it, but his death kind of put a toll on the group, and then eventually, I would say, Winston grew tired of the fact that the group never felt the same, and he left, and he could have moved on. He could have been like a police officer, some sort of higher up, like, security, some sort of higher, bodyguard. I don't know. He moved on because he felt that the Ghostbusters were no more. There's no point in moving on if Egon wasn't there anymore. So you can get away to actually writing, Ernie Hudson out of the movie too, and say that he moved on and made something better of his life. I don't know if he was married in the original movies. I forgot if they ever mentioned that, but he could have got married, had kids, moved on, made a career out of himself, moved on from the Ghostbusters. Like, it was a part of his life, but it wasn't his entire life. So he moved on because remember, he wasn't one of the original three. He got hired on, so he didn't really have a connection to like the job as much as really they did, in a general sense. So you kind of have a way of writing his character on too, because I don't think he might want anything to do with it. If you want something to do with it, you can kind of write his character in, but I'm thinking like how I would do it. I would write his character out saying he eventually moved on because Egon's death would have, done something to him, like he didn't feel it was the same anymore. And then at that point it was only Peter Venkman and Ray, and they were trying to be a two-man duo around this time. And during this time, I didn't mention it yet, but maybe they eventually got married as they were Ghostbusters, and had a family behind the scenes while they were continuing the Ghostbusters thing. Before I get too far into the story, like every one of them got into a family or whatever. I'm just saying that. But then at that point, you can basically talk about, I wanted to do something like how Bill Murray really doesn't want to have anything to do with this movie. You can make that kind of come out in Peter Venkman. After Egon died and after Winston left, he didn't feel it was appropriate to be a Ghostbuster, or he said screw it, and he walked right off into the sunset and basically left the Ghostbusters high and dry, left Ray high and dry. And Ray tried to maybe be a Ghostbuster for, by himself for a long time, but he basically gave it up, and the Ghostbusters just went off and disappeared. He had a family life. He raised a family, got married, stuff like that. And Peter Venkman could have maybe got married. Remember, he never got married. Maybe because he did lose Dana, he loved Dana in the first movie, and she went with Lewis. So maybe he eventually just got depressed and just went off on his own. Maybe he never got married. Maybe he never made a family or anything. Maybe Ghostbusters was his entire life because he never really found anybody. You never know. So basically how I would tie this over, like bringing the old Ghostbusters to the new Ghostbusters, is I would actually say a new threat pops up, like a new ghostly threat tries to pop up to take over the world, New York City or anything like that, and maybe Ray's trying to bring he sees it, he senses it, while he gets it away, he keeps up maybe just gradually looking at stuff, to kind of keep the memory of Egon alive and the Ghostbuster group alive in general, so he keeps it on, and he basically finds out there's something going on, so he tries his best to find, Peter Venkman, he's tried to go off the map. He doesn't want to be found. He's really depressed. He's like this. He doesn't want anything to do with it anymore, which kind of how Bill Murray generally doesn't want to do Ghostbusters anymore. And then basically he tells Peter Venkman, he's like, okay, you might not want to do it, but we got to find someone that can, someone that does, and then you use the old team members of Ray and Peter Venkman to actually go out and try to find a group of Ghostbusters to succeed them, to be their successors, a passing of the torch. You don't just give this movie, you don't just give it to totally new members without having any sort of, hey, we got to write in there why these new Ghostbusters are new Ghostbusters. You have to, and I was thinking, like, it's a passing of the torch. And then Peter Venkman's like, okay, I'm going to do this. This is my job for now. Once we find these new people, we train to be ready, I'm out of it for good. And Ray's like, okay, cool. And then you kind of, it's like a good way of, like, at this end of this movie, writing, Bill Murray out of Ghostbusters for good. He doesn't want anything to do with it, but he's part of the main cast. He needs to be there if it's anything passing of the torch. And I was thinking maybe possibly somehow, like, maybe their children are involved. Maybe, like if you want to play with I'm going to go with the idea of how they wanted it to be an entire girl squad, or maybe you could do a mixed gender, some of them are men, some of them are women, or maybe you could do all male king again, I don't know what you want to do, but maybe you can focus on their kids. Maybe, like, when Ray got married, maybe he has a daughter or son that wants to continue on. Maybe, how Egon probably maybe got with, what's her name, Janine? Maybe they had a daughter, or a son, like, the geeky kid that maybe after their father died, they wanted to continue on. They kept up with the ghost stuff. They kept up being, like the nerdy, smart, scientist-based person. And they stepped up to the plate and said, I want to do this in my father's honor. I want to succeed him as a Ghostbuster. You can kind of maybe have it be their children that succeed them while they're trying to search out for these, this new generation of people, see who wants to be a new Ghostbuster, who would be a good successor to them, and maybe their kids get involved. And then maybe you can, and this is a very big maybe, this is only an idea that randomly came off the top of my head just recently, but maybe, the baby that Dana and Lewis had in the second one, the one that the whole Vigo thing was trying to get through and everything, maybe he grew up and maybe he could be a Ghostbuster now. You never know, it's a good way of kind of having Lewis and Dana kind of have some sort of, maybe they moved off, they lived on their own, they raised this kid, blah, 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 and then, it's a good way of having them cameo in the movie to try to intertwine their characters and maybe Ray, and it kind of brings up, maybe, I know Ghostbusters could be very comedic, but you kind of have some serious tones to it, and I think this movie could delve into, Peter Venkman's depression, the fact that maybe he never got Dana. He loved Dana in the first movie, but he never got her in the second one, and she moved on, had her own family, and then the fact that we can kind of play, Egon's death, and just kind of play, or it has serious, it's comedic, but it has serious tones. Just as a way of writing the character off. I know that might not be entirely what TV fans want, but I think it's a good way of kind of writing a story, to kind of pass the torch, and then you can go more in comedy here and there. But that's that, and they find these things that could be their kids, it could be new generation, it could be a mix and match. Maybe Egon's kid and Ray's kid get together, and then they find these two other people, one of which could be Dana and Lewis's son, and try to make the new generation of Ghostbusters, train them up, get them ready to know what they're doing with all their equipment and everything, because obviously Egon's gone, but maybe his son or daughter, his child might know more about this stuff, and then maybe in the passing of Egon, maybe Ray studied up on learning most of it too, more than he knew in the previous movies, and then it's a way of them teaching them. They teach these new Ghostbusters, and those Ghostbusters then go out and then become the main heroes of the movie, and then you have them defeat the enemy, whatever it is. They're passing the torch. Bill Murray walks off into the sunset. Ray could maybe stick around. Maybe if Dan Aykroyd wants to continue, if they ever do a Ghostbusters 4 or 5 or anything, they continue it. He could be an old mentor to them. But that doesn't necessarily have to happen. If he doesn't want to do it, he passes the torch and he walks off just with Bill Murray into the sunset. In this new group, after being trained, facing this enemy in this movie, and surviving it, you can then use that new group as the continuation for any other movies if you really want to do it, and then you literally write off Winston, Egon, Ray, and Peter Venkman. And you make them out of the story. And it might be a good, and this is another idea I just thought of, and it's my final thoughts on the general idea for this. Maybe as a tribute to Harold Ramis, I could maybe see maybe at the end of the movie, maybe after the credits, or maybe the last scene before the credits playing movie, you might be able to have maybe Peter Venkman and Ray show up to maybe Egon's grave, and they mourn his death as a tribute to the end of the movie. They say, okay, we passed it on, Egon, you can rest in peace now. And maybe if he did have a child with Janine, and that happens, that kid could show up too, and be there with the old Ghostbusters and say, I'm going to succeed you, Dad, kind of thing. And then maybe you can bring in Ernie Hudson as a final tribute. He shows up as Winston, and and it's a final scene in the movie where Winston, Ray, Peter Venkman, and if the possibility of them using a kid, if Egon had a kid, son or daughter, them all standing there in his grave before, the movie ends. And it could be a good tribute as and then you can kind of maybe, it's a good tribute to Harold Ramis's character, Egon and Harold Ramis himself. And I think that might be a good way of doing this movie. I might have gone a little bit off on making it kind of serious toned in a sense, but I don't think it'd be all that serious. You can play to these serious tones, but still have a comedic side. You can still play to the serious tone and still have comedy. I just think of it as a good way of writing off the old Ghostbusters, bringing in some new Ghostbusters, still having comedy, but being serious about the fact that these old Ghostbusters are kind of past their prime, kind of out of touch. They need a new generation of Ghostbusters, and basically events that events that have happened since the last Ghostbusters have caught up to them. Some have moved on. One of them has died. I'm just thinking like that's a good way I think to write on the movie. Just have them succeeded by their kids / finding a new generation of Ghostbusters, training them up, passing them on. They walk up into the sunset, and that's just generally what I think. My name is SnipingIsFun. I hope you guys like this video. What do you guys think about this? If my ideas became a Ghostbusters 3, would you like it? Or is there stuff that you might want to change? Maybe you hate the entire thing. Maybe you don't like the serious tone like I went for. Maybe you want it to be totally serious and no comedic. I don't know. Put in the comment section what you guys think. And maybe put in the comment section maybe what you would do instead. Like, what would you personally want to do for a Ghostbusters 3? My name is SnipingIsFun. Like I said, peace. Please subscribe if you want to. Have a nice day. And stay tuned for future videos of various different topics, from anime and video games to movies and wrestling and anything in between. Hope you guys like this video. See you guys later.